For 7 years, the Alpha King never touched her, until one night. Its towers pierced the clouds, and lightning often danced across its jagged edges, casting fleeting glimpses of dark stone corridors and flickering torchlight. Within those ancient walls, time seemed to follow a different rhythm, a rhythm dictated by centuries of power, secrecy, and the weight of ancestral curses. Ilara moved quietly through the corridors, her footsteps muted against the cold stone floors. 7 years she had spent within this castle, yet the halls still felt vast and alien. She had grown accustomed to the unspoken rules, to the invisible boundaries that separated her from the Alpha King, Kale. She was his ward, his enigma, his shadowed companion, but never his equal, never his mate. Kale watched her from afar, often from the high balcony of the main hall, his figure cloaked in shadow. His eyes were like twin moons in the darkness, cold, unyielding, yet somehow aware of every tremor in her movements. He had never touched her, never offered the warmth of a hand or the comfort of a smile. For 7 long years, he maintained the distance, bound by a curse older than the castle itself. Ilara had learned to live with this distance. She had learned to hide her longing behind calm expressions, to mask the stirrings of her heart whenever his presence brushed against her senses. And yet she could feel it, the subtle pull between them. In moments when his gaze lingered just a heartbeat too long, or when their hands almost brushed as she passed, a strange warmth would ripple through her. That evening, the storm outside raged louder than usual, wind thrashing against the stone walls. Ilara sat in the dim library, the air heavy with the scent of parchment and old magic. She had discovered a small, forgotten alcove behind a tall shelf of dusty tomes. Curiosity, that silent companion, led her here. She ran her fingers over the spines, reading titles of histories and legends, each one whispering secrets of the past. Her hand paused on a leather-bound book, strangely warm to the touch. As she opened it, she realized it was not a book at all. It was a stack of folded letters, their edges worn, their ink faded. The script was elegant, precise, and somehow familiar. Her breath caught as she read the first words, "To Ilara, the shadow of my heart." Her fingers trembled. She had always wondered what Kale thought of her, why he had kept her close yet untouched. Now, the letters answered that question in ways she had never imagined. Each one spoke of longing, of unspoken affection, of fears too heavy to voice. He had written them, she realized, for years. Years she had lived under the same roof as him, never knowing that his heart had been reaching for hers all along. A shiver ran down her spine. The letters revealed a man torn between desire and duty, between love and the ancient curse that bound him. The curse, it seemed, was not just a family secret. It was a force that demanded restraint, that punished any lapse of passion with shadows darker than night itself. Ilara's heart pounded as she read on. There were confessions of sleepless nights, of silent watches by her door, of moments when he had nearly touched her but pulled back, afraid of the consequences. She felt a mixture of sorrow and hope. All this time he had cared, yet the fear of the curse had chained his hands as surely as it had chained his heart. A sudden sound made her jump. Footsteps. Heavy, measured, deliberate. She pressed the letters to her chest and spun around. Kale stood there, framed by the doorway, his presence a storm unto itself. His expression was unreadable, a mask perfected over centuries, but his eyes betrayed the storm within: anger, fear, and something else she could not name. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice low, almost a growl, yet threaded with something softer, almost human. Ilara swallowed. I found these," she said, holding out the letters. "I didn't mean to intrude." Kale's eyes flicked to the letters, and for a moment the cold barrier between them faltered. "You shouldn't have read them," he said, but his voice lacked the sharpness it usually carried. He stepped closer and she could feel the heat radiating from him, a warning and a promise all at once. "I had to know," Ilara whispered. "I had to understand." Kale's gaze softened, but only slightly, and he shook his head. Understanding comes with danger, he said. Some truths are better left hidden. But I've lived here for 7 years, Alara said, her voice firmer now. 7 years of silence, of wondering. I can't pretend anymore. Kale's jaw tightened. He wanted to look away, to retreat into the safety of control, but he could not. Something about her courage, her defiance called to him, stirred the part of him he had long denied. "You are reckless," he said, and the words were sharp, but his hand twitched, as if reaching for her and pulling back at the same moment. "I would rather be reckless than live in shadows," Alara replied, her eyes unwavering. "I would rather risk everything than never know if you truly care." For a moment, the room was silent except for the wind battering the windows. The storm outside seemed to mirror the storm within them, a tempest of longing, fear, and something neither could fully name. Kale turned away, pacing the library, fingers brushing the spines of the tomes as though seeking guidance from the dead. "The curse," he murmured almost to himself. "If I touch you, if I let myself feel, the darkness may consume you. I cannot risk it. Not you, not ever." Alara stepped closer, the distance between them shrinking despite the invisible walls he tried to maintain. "Then let me face it with you," she said softly. "I am not afraid. Whatever comes, I will not run." Kale stopped, his back to her, and for a long moment the weight of his centuries pressed upon him. He had ruled with strength and fear, with order and isolation. But never like this. Never had a human heart penetrated his walls so fully, so boldly. "You don't understand," he said finally, his voice trembling with a rare vulnerability. This is not a simple choice. The curse, it is old, cruel, unyielding. It will take everything from us if we falter." "I understand more than you think," Alara said, stepping until she was within arm's reach. "I have waited, I have watched, I have felt everything, and yet here I am, still standing." Kale's hand twitched again, the urge to reach for her almost unbearable. The storm outside reached a crescendo, thunder shaking the very walls of the castle. And in that moment, he realized something he had not allowed himself to admit. He had been starving for her closeness all these years, craving even the smallest touch, the gentlest sign of connection. But he did not move. He could not. The curse, the fear, the weight of centuries held him back. And yet something in her eyes, a mixture of courage, longing, and undeniable truth, whispered that perhaps the darkness could be faced together. Alara's fingers grazed the edge of his sleeve, almost accidentally. The brush sent a shiver through both of them, a spark of something forbidden, something raw. Kale's head jerked slightly, his composure cracking for the first time. You shouldn't," he said, his voice almost a whisper now, trembling. "I know," she said. "But I cannot pretend anymore." Lightning split the sky, illuminating the library in stark white light. And then, in the silence that followed, Alara heard something that made her heart stop. The softest, almost imperceptible sigh from Kale. It was not resignation, nor relief, nor anger. It was something else entirely. Something that carried years of unspoken longing, of unvoiced pain, and a promise he dared not voice aloud. Before either could speak again, a sound echoed through the corridors, an unusual creak, a step not belonging to the castle staff. Both of them froze. Kale's eyes narrowed, scanning the shadowed corners. He instinctively stepped closer to Alara, placing himself between her and the unknown threat. "Stay behind me," he whispered, a command wrapped in protection. Alara's heart raced, not from fear but from the closeness, the undeniable pull of the Alpha King she had long admired from afar. For 7 years she had been untouchable, unseen, and yet tonight something had shifted. And then from the darkness of the corridor a faint rustling came. Kale's hand brushed hers, not fully, not deliberately, but enough to send a shock through both their hearts. It was a touch charged with restraint, longing, and unspoken words. Alara looked up at him, eyes wide, breath catching. "Kale," she whispered. He did not answer. He could not. But the storm outside mirrored the storm inside, and for the first time in 7 years, the line between them had begun to blur. Something had changed tonight. Something had begun, and neither of them could deny it. The storm had passed, leaving the castle wrapped in a damp, silver mist. Outside, the forest surrounding the cliffs whispered with the movement of unseen creatures, and the river below glistened like molten silver in the dim moonlight. Yet within the castle, the echoes of the previous night's storm lingered, not in the walls, but in the hearts of Kale and Alara. Alara could hardly sleep. She replayed the moment in the library, the letters clutched to her chest, Kale's gaze, and the fleeting, almost accidental touch of his hand. It had been enough to ignite a fire she had held back for 7 years, a fire that now burned in every corner of her mind. By dawn, she wandered to the castle gardens. They were quiet at this hour, shrouded in mist, the petals of ancient flowers dripping with rain. The garden had always been her sanctuary, a place where she could think, breathe, and feel without the suffocating weight of the castle corridors. Kale found her there, standing among the wet flowers, the morning light reflecting off her dark hair. His presence was silent but commanding as always. "You shouldn't be here alone," he said, his voice low, carrying the authority of the alpha, yet softened by a hint of concern. Alara turned, meeting his eyes without hesitation. "Why not?" she asked simply. "Do you fear I cannot handle the world outside the corridors?" Kale's lips twitched, almost a smile, though it did not reach his eyes. "It is not the world I fear," he said. "It is what lurks within these walls and what lurks within myself." Alara stepped closer, ignoring the slight chill that clung to the morning air. "Then let me face it with you," she said, her voice steady. "I have seen enough of your world to know that fear alone does not protect us. Only courage does." Kale studied her, his eyes narrowing as if weighing her words against the centuries of caution he had carried. "You are bold," he said finally, "reckless even, but perhaps that is why you have survived here as long as you have." The tension between them was palpable, a thin thread that could snap at any moment. Kale's hand twitched once more, the unspoken desire for closeness gnawing at him. He had spent 7 years restraining himself, avoiding even the smallest gestures of affection. But now, seeing her brave, unafraid, he felt the chains of that restraint weaken. Alara noticed the conflict in his eyes. "Kale," she whispered, "I know the curse frightens you. I understand that, but I do not fear it. I will not let it separate us." For a moment he said nothing. The wind rustled through the flowers, carrying the scent of rain and earth, and in that silence their hearts spoke louder than words ever could. Then the first threat arrived. A distant cry echoed through the gardens, followed by the clatter of hurried footsteps. Kale's gaze sharpened, and in an instant the alpha emerged fully, not just as a man but as a guardian, a force of nature. Alara's heart pounded as Kale moved to shield her. Shadows twisted at the edges of the garden, coalescing into a figure tall and masked. Kale's presence was protective, unwavering, yet he did not draw his weapon immediately. He needed to gauge the danger before acting, and he would not risk her standing in the line of fire. "You should leave," Kale said to her, his voice firm. "Now." "I will not," Alara said, stepping beside him. "Not while you face this alone." Kale's eyes softened for a brief, almost imperceptible moment. "You are foolish," he said, but there was pride in his voice. "And that is why I cannot turn away from you." The shadowy figure advanced, and Kale's senses flared. He moved like a predator, silent and precise, yet careful not to harm Alara. Every instinct screamed to protect, to strike, to end the threat swiftly. The figure froze, then retreated into the mist, leaving only a whisper of malevolence behind. Alara exhaled, relief washing over her. "It's gone," she said. Kale did not relax immediately. His gaze swept the garden, ensuring no other dangers lingered. Then and only then did he allow himself a moment to face her fully. His eyes were intense, dark as the night, and for the first time she saw the vulnerability beneath the alpha's mask. "You should not be here," he said again, though the edge had softened. "You do not understand what you risk." "I understand more than you think," Alara replied. "I know the curse, I know the danger, and yet I still choose to stand here with you." Kale's hand brushed against hers, again almost accidental, almost a mistake, yet deliberate in its intimacy. The touch lingered longer than either intended. A shiver ran through both of them, a spark igniting that neither could deny. He drew back slightly, his breath uneven. "Alara," he began, then stopped. The word trembled on his lips, heavy with meaning he had never allowed himself to speak. She reached out, gently placing her hand over his. "It's all right," she said softly. "You don't have to be afraid with me." For a long moment, they simply stood there, hand in hand, the storm of the previous night reflected in the quiet intensity of the morning. Kale's mask had begun to crack, revealing the man beneath, the alpha who had lived in restraint and solitude for centuries, now facing a heart that dared to reach for his. But the calm was brief. From the shadowed edges of the garden, movement stirred. A second figure emerged, cloaked in black, silent and purposeful. Kale's instincts flared once more, his hand tightening around the hilt of his dagger, though he did not draw it. He was aware of the threat but also aware of Alara's presence, and he could not allow harm to come near her. "Stay close," he whispered, almost fiercely, his voice low and commanding. Alara moved closer, her heart hammering against her chest, yet she did not shrink away. Instead, she let herself feel the closeness, the warmth, the undeniable connection that had begun to form between them. For 7 years she had been untouchable, unseen. Now she was a part of his world, at least in this moment. The figure advanced slowly and Kale stepped forward, a living shadow of power and authority. He did not attack, did not speak immediately, but the presence alone was enough to hold the intruder at bay. The tension was a taut wire, ready to snap. Then with a sudden, swift motion, the figure vanished into the mist, leaving only a lingering sense of unease. Kale's eyes followed the movement, alert and cautious. He turned to Alara, his expression unreadable. "Are you unharmed?" he asked. "Yes," she said, though her voice trembled slightly. "I'm safe with you." Kale's hand twitched once more, almost reaching for her face, almost brushing her hair from her cheek. The restraint was visible, a physical struggle as intense as any battle. He fought against desire, against the years of isolation and the weight of the curse. "You must understand," he said finally, voice low, almost a growl, "that this closeness is dangerous, for both of us." "I understand," Alara said, her voice unwavering. "But I also know that the danger is worth facing if it means we are honest with ourselves." Kale's gaze held hers, and in that moment, the walls he had built for centuries began to crumble. The Alpha, the man of power and fear, was no longer untouchable, not to her, and not to himself. They walked back toward the castle in silence, the garden mist curling around their feet like a living thing. The air between them was thick with unspoken words, with longing, with the dangerous promise of something neither had allowed themselves to name. As they reached the main hall, a sudden wind gusted through the corridors, extinguishing the torches and plunging them into semi-darkness. Kale's hand found hers, firm and protective, holding it for longer than necessary. The spark between them flared once more, an unspoken acknowledgement of desire, fear, and the bond that had begun to form. Alara looked up at him, heart racing. "Kale," she whispered. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he pressed a finger to his lips, signaling caution. Then, just as the last light flickered in the hall, the sound came, a faint, deliberate click of metal on stone, echoing from the shadowed corridors. Kale stiffened, his body tensing like a coiled spring. He turned, eyes scanning the darkness. "Someone is here," he said, voice low, dangerous. Alara felt a thrill of fear and excitement. For the first time, she realized that standing beside Kale meant sharing both danger and intimacy, that the Alpha's presence was a shield, a promise, and a spark all at once. and as the footsteps grew closer, Kale's grip on her hand tightened. She felt the warmth of him, the strength, the unwavering protection, and knew without a doubt that nothing would ever be the same again. The forest surrounding the castle was ancient, a living shadow of twisted trees, thick vines, and whispers that seemed to float on the wind. Even in daylight, the canopy above was dense, filtering sunlight into thin, green streaks that danced across the forest floor. Mist clung to the roots and leaves, curling around their ankles like ghostly fingers. It was a place where the veil between the living and the spirits was thin, and where Kale had seldom allowed anyone to wander. Yet now, Alara walked beside him, unafraid, though her senses were alive to every sound. Her heart raced, not from fear alone, but from the presence of Kale beside her. 7 years had she been in the castle, a silent observer of the Alpha King's cold authority, and now she walked with him into the heart of his world, into danger and the unknown. Kale's gaze swept the shadows, alert for threats unseen. "Stay close," he said, his voice low, carrying authority and warning. "The forest is older than this kingdom. It holds things you cannot imagine." Alara looked at him, eyes steady. "Then let me learn," she said. "I'm not afraid of the forest, Kale. I'm afraid only of losing you." His eyes flickered at her words, dark and intense, yet softened by something he could not name. For centuries, Kale had ruled with restraint and control, suppressing the desire that stirred within him. He had never allowed himself to consider the possibility of connection, not until Alara. Her courage, her defiance, her quiet strength challenged him in ways he had never faced. They moved deeper into the forest, and the air grew heavier, tinged with the scent of damp earth and ancient magic. Shadows seemed to shift around them, moving with intent, watching, waiting. Kale's hand brushed briefly against hers, a small, almost accidental gesture, but enough to send a spark through both their hearts. "Ilara," he said finally, stopping beside a narrow stream, "there is something you must know. The curse that haunts my bloodline, it is not just a shadow on me. It seeks to take what I hold dear, to punish any bond formed with me. To love me is to risk everything." She stepped closer, looking into his storm-dark eyes. "Then I risk it," she said softly, "because my heart belongs here with you." Kale's chest tightened. For a moment he seemed frozen, caught between the centuries of fear and the undeniable truth in her words. He wanted to pull her close, to hold her and promise safety, yet he feared the curse more than anything. His hand twitched again, almost reaching for her, then retreating. "You do not understand," he whispered. "If I allow myself, if I touch you fully, the consequences may be beyond our control. I cannot risk it." "I do understand," she replied, "and I still choose to be here. Whatever comes, I will not run." The forest seemed to respond to her courage. The mist thickened, curling around their feet, and the wind whispered through the leaves as though carrying a warning or a welcome. Kale's senses flared. He felt the pull of the forest's ancient magic and the proximity of danger. Suddenly, a shape emerged from the mist, a spectral wolf, translucent and glowing with an ethereal light. Its eyes burned with a strange intelligence. Kale stepped in front of Alara, body tense and ready. "Stay behind me," he commanded. Alara's heart pounded, but she did not move away. "I am not afraid," she said. "Let me help you." The wolf circled them, sniffing the air, and then it lunged. Kale moved with the precision of centuries of battle experience, intercepting the creature. He did not strike it with lethal force. He could not, for these were spirits of the forest, guardians testing their worth. With a flick of his wrist, he directed it away, guiding it with energy that seemed both human and supernatural. Alara watched, awestruck, as he moved. Every motion was fluid, powerful, precise. And yet, every so often, his eyes flicked to her, as if silently asking if she was safe. She felt warmth spread through her chest at the realization. He had fought for centuries, faced countless dangers, yet he cared enough to protect her personally. The wolf vanished into the mist, leaving behind only the echo of its howl. Kale exhaled sharply, tension in his shoulders. "The forest does not forgive weakness," he said. "It tests the heart, the mind, the bond between those who walk here." Alara stepped closer to him, her hand brushing his arm. "Then we will face it together," she said. "Whatever comes, we face it as one." Kale's jaw tightened. He wanted to pull her close, to hold her and assure her that she was safe. The temptation was nearly unbearable. For 7 years, he had denied himself the smallest pleasures, watching her laugh, hearing her voice, feeling the warmth of her presence. And now, the spark between them threatened to ignite into something unstoppable. They continued through the forest, and Kale began to speak of his past, of the curse, of ancestors who had failed to contain it, of the sacrifices made in silence. Alara listened, absorbing every word. She could feel the weight of his pain, the centuries of restraint, and it made her courage stronger. She wanted to stand beside him, not as a ward, not as a passive observer, but as an equal. That night, they made camp in a small clearing. The moonlight filtered through the trees, casting silver patterns across the ground. A fire crackled between them, small and fragile against the vast darkness of the forest. Kale sat across from her, his posture tense. "I have never allowed myself, not with anyone," he said quietly, "not to feel this, not to desire." His eyes flicked to hers, and for the first time she saw the depth of longing he had hidden. Alara leaned closer, emboldened. "Then allow it," she whispered. "Allow yourself, even for a moment. We will face whatever comes together." The Alpha King's restraint wavered. He reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. The touch was light, tender, yet it carried the weight of 7 years of unspoken emotion. Alara's breath caught. The world seemed to shrink around them, leaving only the firelight, the forest, and the intensity of their connection. "Kale," she whispered. He did not answer. His gaze held hers, dark and deep, and in that silence both hearts spoke. The bond that had simmered for years began to ignite, a dangerous, thrilling fire neither could deny. But the night was not theirs alone. From the shadows, movement stirred, figures cloaked in darkness, watching, waiting. The forest, alive and ancient, had not released its tests. Kale's senses flared. "Alara," he said, his voice urgent, "behind me, now." She moved instinctively, stepping close. Kale positioned himself between her and the approaching threat. But when the figures stepped into the firelight, they were not human. They were spirits, guardians of the forest, testing the strength of their bond and the courage of their hearts. The largest spirit moved forward, glowing faintly, its eyes like burning coals. Kale met its stance firm, commanding presence, radiating power. "We seek only passage," he said, his voice low, resonant. The spirit's gaze flickered to Alara. It tilted its head as if questioning her worthiness. Alara met its gaze, unafraid. "I walk with him," she said. "I will face whatever comes." The spirit's form shimmered, then it stepped aside, allowing them to pass. But the warning was clear. The trials were not over. As they moved deeper into the forest, Kale allowed himself to glance at her more openly. The closeness, the intimacy, the undeniable pull between them was no longer accidental. He reached out, brushing her hand once more, lingering just a moment longer than before. Alara felt the warmth of his touch, the strength, and the unspoken promise that he was no longer keeping her at a distance. The night grew colder and the forest thickened. Strange lights flickered in the distance, ethereal glows that hinted at spirits, tests, or perhaps warnings. Kale's hand found hers again, gripping it firmly, protective yet intimate. "We must be careful," he said. "The forest will challenge us, and not all who wander here leave unchanged." "I am ready," Alara replied. "With you, I am ready." Their journey continued, step by step, each moment a test of courage, trust, and desire. Kale's control, honed over centuries, began to crumble in her presence. His heart, long caged, began to beat with something he had denied himself: hope, longing, and the undeniable pull of love. And then, as they reached a small glade illuminated by moonlight, the forest itself seemed to pause. Shadows stretched, mist swirled, and the air hummed with power. In that sacred, silent space, Kale finally allowed a longer touch, not a simple brush, but a connection that spoke of restraint broken and hearts opening. Alara looked into his eyes, and in them, she saw the truth he had hidden for 7 years. He had longed for her, even as he had feared the curse. He had avoided her, restrained himself, yet every glance, every breath had been charged with unspoken devotion. "Kale," she whispered. He did not answer, but his hand lingered, holding hers as if grounding both of them against the pull of the forest's ancient magic. The spark between them flared, undeniable, dangerous, and utterly consuming. The forest seemed to recognize it too. A whisper of wind rustled the leaves, carrying a warning and a promise. Love can awaken power, but power can awaken danger. And as they stood together in the moonlit glade, hearts beating in unison, neither could deny that the bond forming between them was no longer safe, no longer simple, but it was theirs. The castle was no longer the sanctuary it had once seemed. Rumors of unrest stirred through the halls, whispered by servants and courtiers alike. The Alpha King, Kale, had always commanded obedience, yet beneath the stone walls and iron doors, plots had begun to form, plots that threatened not only his reign, but the fragile bond forming between him and Alara. Alara sensed the tension the moment they returned from the forest. The castle corridors, once silent, now hummed with unease. Courtiers cast furtive glances, whispers followed their steps, and even the guards moved with a heightened alertness, as though anticipating a storm. Kale moved through the halls like a shadow, his presence commanding and tense. The events in the forest had changed him. The restraint that had governed his every action for 7 years had begun to crack, and Alara's courage and proximity had pushed him to a place he had long denied himself: vulnerability. "Alara," he said quietly, stopping at the threshold of the throne room, "you must be careful. The court watches, and not all intentions are pure." "I am not afraid," she replied, stepping closer to him. "I face what comes because I choose to face it with you." His gaze softened, lingering on her. "Your courage is remarkable," he admitted, though his tone carried a warning. "But do not mistake it for naivety. Power within these walls is dangerous, and love can be more dangerous still." Alara looked at him, unflinching. "Then let me be dangerous with you," she said softly. "I do not wish to hide. I will not run." Kale's jaw tightened, the conflict clear on his face. He wanted to pull her close, to hold her and shelter her from every threat. Yet the curse, the weight of his ancestors, and the dangers that stalked his court held him back. The throne room awaited, bathed in cold light from the high windows. Courtiers and advisors had gathered, tension thick in the air. Some bowed with practiced deference, others lingered at the edges, observing, judging. Kale's eyes swept the room, sharp and commanding, yet he was acutely aware of Alara at his side, an equal in presence if not yet in title. The first challenge arrived as a messenger burst into the hall, breathless. "Alpha King," he cried, "enemies from the northern territories advance. They claim your throne is weakened, that the Alpha is distracted." Kale's eyes narrowed. The northern territories had long coveted his power, seeking to exploit any sign of weakness. But he did not flinch. His hand moved to the hilt of his sword, and every muscle in his body tensed with the authority and precision of centuries of leadership. Alara's hand brushed his arm, instinctively seeking his warmth. She could feel the tension radiating from him, the weight of responsibility pressing down like the ancient stones of the castle itself. "You will not face this alone," she whispered. "I am here, with you." Kale's dark eyes flicked to hers, and for a heartbeat the world seemed to shrink to that connection alone. The intensity of their bond, the courage, the longing, the unspoken trust, was undeniable. He wanted to reach for her, to draw her into his arms, but restraint held him back. He turned to address the court, voice low and commanding. "Prepare the defenses. No one enters this castle without facing me, and tell the northern forces they will learn that Kale's resolve is unbreakable." Courtiers bowed, murmuring in agreement, and the tension in the hall remained, a storm held in check by Kale's presence. Yet beneath it all, Kale's mind lingered on Alara. She had stood beside him, unafraid, her courage unwavering. For the first time in centuries, he felt a spark of hope, not just for his kingdom, but for himself. That evening, the castle corridors were quiet once more, but the night was restless. Kale led Alara to the high balcony overlooking the storm-tossed forest. Moonlight reflected on the distant river and the wind whispered through the trees, carrying the scent of rain and earth. "You should not be here," Kale said, voice low though not commanding. "You do not understand the danger that follows us." "I do," she said, stepping closer. "I understand more than you think, and I choose to stay." The distance between them closed almost instinctively. Kale's hand brushed hers, a touch neither accidental nor entirely intentional, yet fraught with emotion. Alara's heart raced. 7 years of longing, of silent observation, of unspoken desire had led to this moment. "You tempt me," Kale said, his voice thick with conflict. "You tempt me in ways I should not allow." "I do not wish to tempt you," she whispered. "I only wish to be with you. To face whatever comes together." His hand lingered on hers, a moment of shared warmth, of connection. And then, finally, he allowed himself a step closer, his presence enveloping her. "You are reckless," he murmured, though his eyes betrayed the storm within. "And you are afraid," she replied softly. "Of what? Of yourself? Of me? Or of the curse?" Kale's jaw tightened. "All of it," he admitted. "And yet I cannot resist." The tension between them was a living thing, thick and unyielding. Kale had spent centuries avoiding what he now longed for, and Alara had spent 7 years waiting for what she now felt was within reach. Their bond, once distant and silent, had become undeniable, tangible, and dangerously close to breaking through all barriers. But the night was far from safe. A distant horn echoed across the valley, signaling an approaching threat. Kale's body tensed, every muscle alert. He turned to Alara, gaze sharp and protective. "Inside," he commanded, gesturing to the safety of the castle interior. They moved quickly through the corridors, the echo of their footsteps swallowed by the vast stone halls. Guards had been alerted, doors secured, yet the tension remained. Kale did not speak of fear. He did not need to, but his grip on her hand, though subtle, conveyed every ounce of his concern. Once inside, they reached the council chamber. Maps were spread across the table, candles flickering, casting shadows that danced across the walls. Advisors murmured, discussing strategies, but Kale's mind was partially elsewhere. His gaze kept returning to Alara, standing resolute by his side. "You have grown strong," he said softly, almost to himself. "Stronger than I ever imagined. Perhaps stronger than I am willing to admit." Alara met his gaze. "Strength is not measured by fear or caution," she said. "It is measured by the courage to stand, even when the world is against you, and I will stand with you." The hours passed in planning and preparation. The northern forces would not arrive until dawn, giving them time, but not much. Kale's mind was a storm of strategy and concern, yet he could not ignore the pull of the bond forming between them. Finally, as the council dispersed, Kale found himself alone with Alara in the dim candlelight. He turned to her, his expression unreadable. "You should rest," he said. "Tomorrow will test more than just our strength. It will test our resolve, our courage, and the bond between us." Alara stepped closer, their hands brushing, lingering. "I do not wish to rest," she said softly. "Not when we are here together." Kale's breath caught. He had denied himself this closeness for centuries, and now the desire to reach out to bridge the distance was nearly unbearable. You do not understand what you ask," he said, voice low, strained with restraint. "I understand more than you think," she replied. "I have waited 7 years. I will wait longer if I must, but I will not hide from what we feel. I will not run from it." The words struck him with the force of a storm. He had kept her at a distance for protection, for control, for fear of the curse. Yet now her courage, her defiance, her unwavering trust demanded a response he could no longer deny. For the first time in 7 years, Cale allowed a small, deliberate touch. His fingers brushed hers, lingering, tracing the contours of her hand with care. The spark between them ignited a fire neither could contain. Alara's breath caught, her heart racing. "Cale," she whispered. He did not answer. His eyes held hers, dark, intense, and filled with a vulnerability he rarely showed. The storm within him, the centuries of restraint, the fear of the curse, the weight of power, collided with the undeniable pull of desire and trust. The moment stretched, fragile and electric. Outside, the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, casting long shadows across the chamber. The world outside moved on, but within these walls, time had slowed, focusing on the bond between them, the choice before Cale. And then a sudden sound shattered the fragile calm, a horn from the northern territory, closer than expected, echoing across the valley like a challenge. Cale's head snapped toward the sound, tension coiling in his body. "Alara," he said, gripping her hand with quiet urgency, "we have no time. Whatever we do, we face it together." She nodded, heart pounding. "Together," she echoed, determination shining in her eyes. Cale's eyes softened for a fleeting moment, and he pressed his hand gently over hers, not a touch of desire this time, but a promise. A promise of protection, of partnership, and of a bond that would be tested, forged, and strengthened in the fire to come. The northern forces were approaching. The castle stood ready, and within it, the Alpha King and the girl who had awakened his heart prepared to face the trials that would define their future, together. The northern forces had arrived, their banners dark against the first light of dawn. The castle walls shook with the weight of approaching war, the clash of swords and shields already echoing faintly from the valley below. Yet within the battlements, Cale and Alara stood together, hands intertwined, hearts beating in unison. "This is it," Cale said, voice low but firm. "Whatever happens, you remain by my side, we face it together." Alara nodded, courage steady in her eyes. "Always," she replied. "No matter the danger, no matter the cost." Cale's eyes softened, and for a moment the centuries of restraint, fear, and solitude seemed to melt away. He pressed a brief, protective kiss to her hand, a promise of trust, a spark of something deeper that had lain dormant for 7 long years. The northern riders came closer, and the air thickened with tension. Cale's warriors, trained and fierce, took their positions, yet the Alpha King knew that skill alone would not determine the outcome. He needed unity, courage, and the bond that had grown between him and Alara, strength forged not by power alone, but by trust and shared heart. "Stay close," he murmured, guiding her toward the inner wall. The wind whipped through their hair, carrying the distant cries of battle. Yet Alara did not falter. She had faced storms in the forest, tests of courage and spirit, and she would face this as well. The first wave of northern soldiers reached the gates. Arrows flew like streaks of fire across the sky, and the clash of metal rang out. Cale's presence was commanding, a storm of strategy and precision. He moved with unmatched skill, intercepting enemies with the strength and grace of a predator protecting what he loved. Alara stood beside him, her heart racing, yet her resolve unwavering. She had trained in secret with Cale, learning to defend herself, to move with awareness and purpose. Though she did not wield a sword with his mastery, her courage and determination were enough to stand beside him, to be more than just a witness, but a participant in the defense of the kingdom, and in the defense of the bond that had grown between them. The battle raged on. Arrows darkened the sky, soldiers clashed, and the castle walls trembled. Cale's eyes flicked to Alara repeatedly, ensuring her safety, guiding her movements with subtle gestures. And in those fleeting glances, the depth of their connection shone brighter than any torchlight. They were no longer master and ward, alpha and ward. They were equals in courage, in heart, in spirit. Then came the shadow from the horizon. The rider Cale had seen before, cloaked in black, approaching with unnatural speed. The rider dismounted, revealing a figure whose presence seemed to bend the light and chill the air. Cale's senses flared, instinct and centuries of training guiding him. "Alara," he said, voice low, almost a growl. "Behind me, trust me." Alara did not hesitate. She moved closer, feeling the warmth of his presence, the strength radiating from him. She trusted him completely, not only in skill but in heart. For 7 years she had waited for this moment, not just to stand beside him, but to stand with him, connected, unafraid. The shadowed figure advanced, eyes gleaming with dark malice. Cale stepped forward, every motion precise and deliberate, yet his mind and heart were not focused on the enemy alone. His gaze lingered on Alara, the bond they had forged in fire, in forest, and in whispered confessions giving him a strength beyond skill or weapon. "You cannot touch her," Cale said, voice resonant with authority and warning. "Not while I breathe." The figure laughed softly, a sound that sent shivers through the night air. "You cannot hide from the curse, Alpha," it said. "One touch, one step toward desire, and everything you hold dear will burn." Cale's hand found hers, holding it tightly. "I choose the risk," he said firmly. "I will not let fear dictate my heart or hers. We face it together." The shadow moved with unnatural speed, but Cale was faster. Steel clashed, sparks flew, and the Alpha's power surged, not just through skill but through the connection to Alara. Every time he glanced at her, his strength doubled, his focus sharpened. Their bond had become a force, stronger than fear, stronger than the curse, stronger than centuries of isolation. Alara, inspired by his courage, moved beside him, deflecting, observing, and lending support where she could. She was not a passive witness but an active participant in the battle, and Cale's heart swelled with admiration and longing. He had denied himself closeness, yet now, with her beside him, he realized that protection alone was not enough. He needed her presence, her courage, her heart entwined with his. The shadowed figure faltered, surprised by their unity. Cale pressed forward, every movement a dance of power and precision, yet always with one eye on Alara. In a final, decisive strike, he disarmed the figure, sending the dark energy recoiling. The intruder vanished, leaving only the echo of malice in the night. Cale exhaled, turning to Alara, eyes dark and intense. "Are you unharmed?" he asked, concern threading every word. "I am," she said softly, her chest heaving, adrenaline and emotion mingling, "because we faced it together." A silence fell, broken only by the distant sounds of retreating enemies. Cale's hand lingered over hers, holding her close, yet not touching in a way that would risk the curse. The spark between them, however, was undeniable. "You risked yourself," he said, voice low, almost reverent. "For me, for us." "I would do it again," she replied, eyes steady. "I will always stand with you, Cale, whatever comes, whatever the curse, whatever the world throws at us." His gaze softened, the storm within him settling into something warmer, gentler. For 7 years he had denied himself closeness, denied himself love, denied himself the warmth of another heart beside his. But now he could no longer resist, not when every moment with Alara reminded him of the life and connection he had been missing. Cale reached out, tentatively, and allowed his fingers to brush hers fully. The spark ignited, no longer a fleeting thrill but a living fire, a bond that had survived centuries of isolation and trials. Alara felt it too, the connection uniting them, burning brighter than any fear, any curse, any shadow that had threatened to separate them. They moved closer, hearts beating in unison. "I cannot hold back any more," Cale whispered, voice thick with emotion. 7 years I should have reached for you sooner." Alara smiled softly, tears glimmering in her eyes. "Then do not hold back now," she said. We have waited long enough. At last, the distance between them vanished. Kale's hands cradled her face gently, and their lips met in a touch that was both tender and charged, a release of 7 years of restraint and longing. The fire between them was not only passion but trust, connection, and the courage to face whatever came next together. The castle walls seemed to sigh, the forest whispers carried a softer tone, and the first light of dawn bathed the battlements in gold. Outside, the remnants of battle quieted, the northern forces retreating in awe of the castle's defense and the Alpha King's unmatched power. But within, Kale and Alara stood entwined, hearts and spirits united, the curse's shadow momentarily held at bay by the strength of their bond. Kale pressed his forehead to hers, voice barely above a whisper. "We have survived the night," he said. "But more than that, we have found each other." Alara's hands rested on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "And we will face whatever comes," she replied. "Together, always." The Alpha King finally allowed himself a smile, the first in centuries that was not shadowed by restraint or fear. For 7 years, he had denied his heart, but now it beat freely, aligned with the one who had awakened it. The castle stood strong, the forest quiet, and the bond between Kale and Alara had been forged in fire, courage, and love. The curse remained, a whisper on the edges of their lives, but they had proven something far more powerful. Together, they could face anything, and their hearts were stronger than any darkness. As the sun rose fully over the horizon, casting light over stone towers and misty forests, Kale held Alara close. For the first time, he did not fear the curse, the world, or his own heart. He had touched her, not just with his hands but with his soul, and she had returned that touch with her courage, her trust, and her love. And in that golden dawn, the Alpha King and the woman who had waited 7 years by his side knew this truth. Whatever the future held, whatever shadows approached, they would face it as one, hearts entwined, unbroken, and unafraid.